Okay, let's dive into something that's really been grabbing headlines recently. If you've been following aviation news, you've probably noticed this string of really unsettling incidents.
Yeah, it feels, particularly jarring. We keep hearing how air travel is safer than ever, statistically speaking.
Exactly. But early 2025 saw what our sources are calling this unusual cluster of events. It definitely raises questions.
And then, of course, the tragedy in June, a major disaster.
So today we're taking this stack of sources. We've gathered articles, reports, analysis, and we're going deep. Our mission for you is to cut through the noise, try to understand what actually happened in these key events.
And explore where investigators even begin to look for answers.
Right, and unpack what this whole period, the surge and the crash, might mean for the future of flying. We'll focus quite a bit on that devastating Air India crash in Ahmedabad, June 12th. That's kind of our focal point.
But linking it back, to those earlier incidents that first started ringing alarm bells for some people.
What's really striking right off the bat is that contradiction you mentioned. Air travel has become incredibly safe.
Oh, absolutely. The stats are remarkable. Sources point out, between 2018 and 2022, the chance of a fatality was like 1 in 13.4 million.
Wow. Compare that to the 60s or 70s, maybe 1 in 350,000 back then.
It's a huge improvement, built on decades of learning from incidents, rigorous investigation.
Yet the sheer number and the kind of incidents in early 2025 really shook that perception for a lot of folks.
It really did. It makes you wonder, were these just random, isolated events? Or were there deeper factors connecting them?
Our sources definitely highlighted this wave hitting the news right at the start of the year. So let's walk through some of the key ones. January, February 2025.
Okay. Well, first up, January 29th, near Washington, D.C., over the Potomac River, that mid-air collision.
Yeah, the American Airlines plane and a U.S. Army helicopter. Really alarming.
Especially the altitude. It happened at about 325 feet. And sources note that's actually higher than the FAA's limit for helicopters in that specific corridor, which is 200 feet.
And tragically, everyone involved.
Yeah, all 67 people on both aircraft were killed. Investigators are looking hard at flight path issues, communication maybe.
It really puts a spotlight on managing airspace.
Yeah.
Especially near busy cities.
Definitely. And the problems weren't just in the air. Just a week later, February 5th, out in Seattle, SeaTac.
Ah, the taxiing incident. Japan Airlines jet clipped a parked Delta plane.
That's the one. Thankfully, no injuries there, but, damaged planes.
What were the initial thoughts there? Weather? Ground crew mix-up?
Sources mentioned both, yeah. Poor visibility, maybe, miscommunication between ground crews. It really highlights how important those tarmac rules are.
And ATC coordination, situational awareness tech.
Yeah.
All of it. Especially at a busy place like SeaTac.
Precisely. And then, the very next day, February 6th, another tragedy. This one showing the risks of flying in remote, harsh areas.
Bering Air, Alaska.
Right. A commuter plane, a Cessna Caravan, took off from Unalakleet, then just disappeared from radar pretty quickly.
Sources said there was some kind of sudden event around 3:18 p.m. Loss of speed, altitude.
Yeah, very rapid. The wreckage was found later in the icy Bering Sea. All 10 people on board sadly lost their lives.
And the conditions were tough. Snow, fog.
Light snow, fog, about 17 degrees Fahrenheit. Really challenging environment.
And sources specifically pointed out, didn't they, that this was the third major U.S. mishap in just over a week.
They did. That phrase definitely got attention, raised the level of concern nationally, but it didn't stop there.
No, February 10th, Scottsdale, Arizona. The private jet crashed.
Yeah, veered off the runway during landing, hit another parked jet, burst into flames.
Sources mentioned a connection to Vince Neil, though he wasn't flying.
Right. The pilot was killed, 3 passengers injured. Early talk was about maybe excessive speed or the wrong angle on approach.
So the NTSB is looking into pilot actions, mechanical problems, conditions, the usual suspects for a landing accident.
Exactly. And that one, involving general aviation, was a reminder that risks aren't just with the big commercial jets. Landing is always critical.
Then just 2 days later, Feb 12th, San Diego Bay. A Navy jet this time?
An EA-18G Growler crashed during an aborted landing approach. Both pilots ejected safely, thankfully.
Suspected cause?
Mechanical. That's what sources indicated, yeah.
Yeah.
Potential mechanical issue. And there was that temporary beach closure, too, Kellogg Beach, because of potential fuel leaks.
Right, the environmental aspect.
Yeah.
And finally, rounding out this intense period, February 17th, Toronto.
The Delta flight crashed on landing, flipped upside down.
Amid bad weather, right?
Yeah.
Gusty winds, blowing snow.
Yeah, very challenging conditions. 8 people injured, 1 critically. But everyone, all 80 on board, were evacuated. Canada's TSB is handling that investigation.
So you look at that list. Mid-air collision, ground incident, remote crash, private jet landing, military jet issue, commercial jet in bad weather. It's a lot, all at once.
It really is. And it begs the question, just a string of terrible luck. Or are there common threads, deeper issues maybe?
That's exactly where the sources started to go, moving beyond just reporting the events to analyzing potential links.
Because aviation accidents, they're almost never just one single thing, right? It's usually a chain. And investigators are always looking for those links, especially the systemic ones.
And this cluster of events seemed to really amplify the focus on certain factors investigators always consider.
Exactly. It's like the spotlight got brighter on potential underlying vulnerabilities. Our sources pointed to a few key areas these incidents seem to touch on collectively.
Like corporate oversight and safety culture.
Absolutely. Sources really stress this isn't just about one person making a mistake. It's about the whole environment.
Context in which they work.
Right. Are companies truly prioritizing safety, or are profits sometimes put ahead? Does that affect training rigor, adherence to rules? Is there a real culture where people feel safe raising concerns?
Sources were pretty direct, weren't they? Linking inadequate oversight, maybe profit pressures, to conditions where errors become more likely.
They were, suggesting that small issues can become huge problems if the safety culture isn't robust.
Makes sense. You need the system to back up the people. And tied to that, obviously, is mechanical and structural failures.
Fundamental. Sources talked about worn parts, maybe inspections not being thorough enough, or pressure to cut costs on manufacturing or maintenance.
That phrase about cutting corners, turning small defects disastrous, that really sticks with you.
It does. And the suspected mechanical issue in that San Diego Navy jet crash, that's exactly where investigators would drill down. Maintenance logs, part histories, the wreckage itself.
And often, even when pilot error is mentioned, it might point back to broader things like training and operational protocols.
That's a crucial point sources made. Okay, maybe the pilot did something, but why? Were they properly trained for that specific situation, that aircraft?
Or was there pressure? Schedule pressure, rushing things.
Exactly. Sources suggested things like inadequate pilot prep, maybe lack of oversight for maintenance crews, rushed procedures. These can sometimes, disturbingly, trace back to company decisions driven by the bottom line.
Like the Scottsdale crash. If speed was an issue, investigators would look at the pilot's training, sure, but also any operational pressures.
Right? It's the whole picture.
Yeah.
And then there's weather, of course. Alaska, Toronto. Obvious weather factors.
But sources stress that even bad weather is often something you can plan for, right? Mitigate.
Should be, yeah. Proper forecasting, good pre-flight planning, ensuring the plane's equipment is ready for those conditions, that should handle most weather risks.
So a failure to prepare properly for known bad weather, that could point back to oversight issues again.
It could, potentially. Did someone make a risky call because of other pressures? The Alaska and Toronto probes would definitely look at whether all the right weather procedures were followed.
Sources also briefly touched on other things. Airspace management, communication errors like in the Potomac crash.
Ground operations, communication like in Seattle.
Yeah. So the big takeaway from sources looking at these early 2025 incidents was this focus on systemic issues, especially potential corporate pressures or oversight gaps that might have contributed to so many things happening close together.
Which sets a pretty grim stage, unfortunately, as we fast forward to June 12, 2025, and that truly devastating event. Air India flight AI-171 in Ahmedabad.
Right. Here's where those earlier concerns that focus on potential vulnerabilities tragically collided with a massive loss of life.
The details from the sources are just harrowing. Air India flight AI-171, a Boeing 787 Dreamliner, modern plane.
Bound for London Gatwick, took off from Ahmedabad's airport just before 1:40 p.m. local time, India Standard Time, that Thursday.
And the critical moments happen almost immediately after takeoff.
Yeah, sources say it only reached about 625 feet altitude, barely off the ground.
Before encountering what's officially termed a catastrophic failure.
At that point, the pilots, Captain Sumit Sabharwal, very experienced, over 8,000 hours, and First Officer Clive Kundar, 1,100 hours, they issued a Mayday call.
A chilling call, right at that low altitude. And then, silence, no more communication with ATC.
The impact. Horrific. It came down into a hostile building in the Magani area outside the airport itself.
Eyewitness accounts and sources are brutal.
Yeah.
A massive sound, a massive fireball, thick smoke, a thunderous explosion.
One account mentioned seeing seeing bodies and debris scattered everywhere. Just awful.
And sources noted the intensity of the fire was likely made worse because it was fueled up for that long flight to London. A lot of fuel on board.
Carrying 242 people, 232 passengers, 10 crew.
Sources mentioned some passengers, including the former Chief Minister of Gujarat, Vijay Rupani.
And that poignant detail about the British passenger, Jamie Ray Meek, whose last Instagram video saying goodbye India went viral afterwards, really brought home the human tragedy.
Yeah, passengers from India, Britain, Portugal, Canada. Just devastating for so many families.
The immediate response was huge, wasn't it? Fire crews, ambulances, disaster teams, the NDRF.
Absolutely. A massive emergency effort. The airport shut down indefinitely. Official statements came quickly. Air India expressing sorrow, the Prime Minister directing assistance, the Home Minister assuring support.
And helplines set up immediately, which is crucial for families desperate for any news.
So, faced with something this catastrophic, especially after that period of heightened concern, how do they even start to figure out what happened?
This is where that meticulous investigation process comes in. And the vital, absolutely vital role of the black boxes.
Right, the black boxes. Everyone's heard the term, but understanding why they're so critical, especially when the plane itself is largely destroyed, like in Ahmedabad, is key.
They're not actually black, are they? Bright orange.
Exactly, bright orange, so they're easier to find in wreckage. And they are built incredibly tough, designed to withstand massive impacts, intense fire, deep water pressure.
And every commercial plane has two of them.
Two main types, yes. First, there's the flight data recorder, the FDR. Think of it as the plane's technical diary.
Recording thousands of things.
Constantly. Things like airspeed, altitude, heading, how the engines are performing, every single control input the pilots make, any system warnings, flap positions, landing gear. Huge amounts of data. Usually stores about 25 hours worth.
So it paints this incredibly detailed picture of what the plane was doing, how the pilots were flying it. What's the second one?
That's the cockpit voice recorder, the CVR. It captures audio from the cockpit.
Conversations between the pilots.
Yes, their conversation, radio calls to ATC, any automated alarms or warnings the plane makes, plus just the background sounds in the cockpit engine noise, clicks, maybe sounds of stress on the airframe.
Gives crucial insight into what the crew knew, what they were saying, how they reacted.
Absolutely. Sources call them the aviation equivalent of DNA evidence. In a crash like AI-171, where physical evidence is obliterated and witnesses aren't available, they are indispensable.
They offer the most objective, second-by-second account possible.
Exactly. The data from those boxes is fundamental for figuring out the cause, especially if it's technical or related to crew actions. And that info directly feeds into safety improvements, changes to training, procedures, even aircraft design. They point the way when other clues are gone.
And the investigation itself, like the process used by India's AAIB, is incredibly thorough.
It has to be. An investigator in charge is appointed. All the relevant countries where the plane was registered, operated, designed, built are notified.
Which is why Boeing experts are assisting India's DGCA and AAIB with the AI-171 probe.
Right. Then it's about preserving everything. Photos, witness statements, ATC tapes, radar logs, and of course recovering those black boxes.
Then the expert teams come in. Engineers, pilots.
Exactly. Engineers, pilots, ATC specialists, sometimes medical experts, they analyze everything meticulously, layering the FDR data with the CVR audio, radar tracks, ATC calls, weather info, any physical evidence, painstakingly reconstructing that timeline.
Building that complete picture.
Trying to understand pilot decisions, system performance, environmental factors, everything.
And the goal isn't just what happened, but why, right? To prevent it again.
That's the core mission. Draft reports get written, peer-reviewed, shared internationally for comment, then finalized with specific safety recommendations. The whole point, sources stress, is finding the root cause or causes and making changes so it doesn't happen again.
So, stepping back from the technical side, the investigation. What does this all mean? This whole period, the early incidents, the Ahmedabad crash, what are the broader impacts?
Huge impacts. They ripple outwards, affecting people, trust, the whole system. Sources really delve into the psychological toll.
You can only imagine. For the families involved, sources described it as deep and long-lasting.
Truly horrific. Intense shock, disbelief, agonizing grief, that terrible uncertainty waiting for news, for identification.
And the long-term effects. PTSD, depression, anxiety.
Yes, prolonged grief. Sources highlighted how crucial immediate support is. That first aid listening, accurate updates to stop rumors, treating remains with dignity, dedicated helplines with trained people.
And stressing that the support has to continue long after the cameras leave.
Absolutely. Emotional recovery takes a very long time.
And it's not just the families, is it? The first responders, too.
Definitely. They're exposed to incredibly traumatic scenes, firefighters, police, recovery teams. They're also at high risk for PTSD, intrusive memories.
Sources mentioned needing them to work in pairs, get rest, have regular debriefings with psychologists.
Yeah, very important. Cautioning against that idea that they're somehow superhuman or immune. Their well-being is critical.
Beyond the immediate human cost, that sheer number of incidents early in the year, followed by Ahmedabad, it naturally fuels public concern, doesn't it?
It does. Sources noted it prompts that questioning. Is this just a statistical blip, given how safe flying usually is? Or does it point to deeper problems maybe being missed?
You see polls asking people about their confidence in safety measures.
Right. And even though the long-term stats are good, as we said, these very visible tragedies inevitably raise concern, can erode public trust a bit.
And that public concern, that focus, it drives demands for change, for accountability.
Precisely. These events always reinforce the need for continuous improvement everywhere. Sources pointed to areas often reviewed or strengthened afterwards.
Things like pilot training, making sure maintenance is absolutely thorough, no corners cut.
Yes, stricter weather guidelines, transparent investigations, better tech for situational awareness, better communication ground, ATC, cockpit.
And really sticking to airspace rules, like those altitude limits.
All of that. And then there's the legal side, accountability. It's complex.
Fault isn't usually simple. Could be pilots, the airline, the manufacturer, ATC.
Potentially multiple factors. And for families seeking answers, it can mean complex legal battles, wrongful death claims, personal injury suits. Very challenging cases, according to the sources.
So wrapping up this deep dive, we've gone from that unsettling wave of incidents early in 2025. Looked at the factors investigators zero in on: oversight, mechanics, training.
Detailed the tragic Ahmedabad crash, the critical role of the black boxes in the investigation.
And touched on those wider impacts: the human costs, public trust, the push for stronger safety measures.
Aviation is definitely complex. So many links in that safety chain.
Our goal here was really to help you connect the dots, based on the sources we had, to understand this turbulent period a bit better.
And maybe the biggest takeaway, something that echoes through the sources despite the safety stats, is this thought.
That while flying is incredibly safe, statistically.
Each incident, especially a catastrophe like AI-171, is just a grim reminder. There's zero room for complacency. None.
Absolutely. The ongoing investigations aim to find exactly what went wrong in each case.
Leaving you, perhaps, to think about that critical need for constant vigilance, relentless scrutiny, and that unwavering commitment to safety from everyone involved to prevent the next one.